Hi everyone, my name is Ayesha Gupta and I am the current webinar coordinator of AIC's Emerging Conservation Professionals Network. Today we are so pleased to have 4 speakers with us. Emily Williams, Conservator of Archaeological Materials at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Tom Edmondson, Paper and Photograph Conservator in Private Practice in Kansas City, Missouri. LeeAnn Gordon, Manager of Programs and Events for the American Schools of Oriental Research, and Ayesha Fuentes, Conservation Intern in the Division for Cultural Properties at the Department of Culture in Thimphu, Bhutan. Biographies for the speakers can be found on the AIC blog. Now I would like to welcome our speakers. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. We also have Eliza Spalding, ECPN Chair, with us, who will be moderating the Q&A portion of the program, and Eric Pourchot, AIC Director of Institutional Advancement, who may chime in at some point throughout the program. Hi, Eliza and Eric.
Hi, Anisha.
The video you see is being shared through GoToWebinar. Just to quickly review some of the features of the GoToWebinar program. The view window where you see our group video screen now can be resized by clicking and dragging the lower right corner. The control panel is where you as an attendee can take some control on your own screen. You may find that with inactivity, the control panel automatically minimizes. If you'd like to keep it open for the entire presentation, under View, there is an Auto Hide the Control Panel option that can be turned off by unselecting it. The audio section tells you if you are joined to the audio by phone or internet. All of you listening out there are muted, so the way that you will be communicating is through the question/chat box. There is a raise hand option, but we won't be using that today. Today's program is ECPN's 3rd webinar. Our first webinar was on July 26, 2012, and featured Debbie Hess-Norris, who spoke about self-advocacy and fundraising for independent research. Our second webinar was on November 30th, 2012, and featured Rosa Lowinger, Julia Brennan, and Paul Messier, who spoke about considering private practice as a career path. Links to videos of both of these webinars can be found on AIC's YouTube account. For those who may be unfamiliar with ECPN, we are a network within AIC dedicated to supporting conservation professionals as they move through the first stages of their careers. We fulfill this mission through a range of programs, including these webinars, which are dedicated to topics of interest to the ECPN community. To learn more about ECPN and our range of programs, please visit us on AIC's website, Facebook, and the AIC blog. I'd quickly like to give everyone a sense of our audience today using information from the poll questions you filled out during registration. Over 65 people representing 22 states and 2 provinces are joining us today. 84% of our audience has had a conservation internship before. Our audience is 58% pre-program, 15% graduate students, 9% between 1 and 6 years out of school, and 17% more than 7 years out of school. Overall, there is a strong interest to work in an institutional setting. And now, each speaker will begin by introducing themselves and either discuss the capacity in which they've worked with pre-program interns, as is the case for Tom and Emily, or discuss their experience as a pre-program intern, as is the case for LeeAnn and Ayesha. This will be followed by 2 group discussion questions. We'll then wrap up the program with audience Q&A, so please feel free to write in questions throughout the program in the question box. Many thanks to everyone for joining us today, and let's get started. Tom, if you'd like to begin by introducing yourself, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Anisha. I'm obviously Tom Edmondson, and I'm a senior conservator in paper and photographs. I'm in private practice at Hugh Edmondson Conservation Services in Kansas City. I hope you've had a chance to read the bio that I made available. We have been involved with pre-program and program interns for several years now. But the number of pre-program interns that we have taken in either a paid or unpaid position has been 6. And I am proud to say that all of them have moved on, went to graduate school, and are now in the field. We've had 4 first-year interns and 2 third-year interns, and we've had 3 mid-career interns have been here. I found I have found that working with the interns has been generally a two-way street. I feel that one, what it does is it makes me constantly rethink what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. The questions that get raised by the interns always are challenging, and I appreciate that. The way we work is we try to make sure that that the interns understand that that they are free to question us, free to engage in conversations with us. We try to make sure that we engage the interns. It is a private practice, and so they do realize that that they're taking away from our capacity to generate income, but we feel that what we're contributing to the field makes up for that. The way things generally work with us, interns come in, the pre-program interns come in an unpaid position initially. We start them off with a matting project where they learn to cut mats, and we have them produce 6 different styles of mats for works of art on paper, which becomes part of their permanent portfolio. As we introduce them to early preliminary procedures of conservation treatment, and they become more and more proficient, we try to find ways to give them an hourly pay for treatment procedures that they have mastered and can perform on their own after we've given them basic instruction. And I think that what we really like to have our interns take away is a respect for all works on paper and photographs. We make sure that they understand that what we think of any given piece is not as important as what the owner thinks of it. And we try to instill in them a real respect for individual people and their works, as well as an understanding of what the concepts are in the field of conservation. And we try to make sure that they understand that the concepts that we're teaching them don't just relate to works of art on paper photographs, but they are general concepts that are generally true throughout the field. I think that's enough, I hope.
Yeah, no, that's great. Emily.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Emily Williams, and I'm the Archaeological Conservator at Colonial Williamsburg. And over the past 18 years, I've had 25 pre-program interns in the lab, 10 of whom have gone on to conservation programs, 4 have gone on to pursue graduate work in archaeology, 2 have opted to have children, and 1 has joined the Navy. So a kind of diverse range of results from the internships. I have to say that the number is high because we offer different lengths of internships. If somebody is interested in just spending a month in the lab or 3 months in the lab, I will consider that, and equally if they're interested in spending a year, I will. The thing that I particularly like working with pre-program interns is their enthusiasm. Everything is new to them, and after working with some of the materials that I've worked with for a long time, that seems very fun and refreshing to me. I also learn a lot from them, similar to what Tom said. The questions that they ask make me revisit approaches. It makes me have to think how best to explain things, and I find that a growth process for myself. Similar to Tom's answer, it can also be a balancing act. There's a lot of different activities going on, from the field work to exhibit work, and sometimes keeping all those and being very present for the interns can be a task for me. I take both archaeology students and conservation students as interns, partly because I feel that conservation is a really important part of the archaeology process, and it's a part that archaeologists, particularly historical archaeologists, are just beginning to really recognize and value, and I feel that by taking archaeology students, I can hopefully help them to see a little bit of the nuances that conservation can bring both to archaeological analysis, but also some, I can also help hopefully to dissuade some of the myths that exist in archaeology, such as you just need a good battery charger and all objects can be treated. So that's one of my goals. We also take postgraduate interns and graduate interns, and I love the interplay between the different levels in the lab and everybody teaching everybody steps along the process. I was asked to talk just briefly about whether there was a difference in supervising paid or unpaid internships, and most of the internships in our lab are unpaid because there isn't a funding stream. We often take unpaid internships and then interns, and then find pockets of funding that allow us to hire them. I find that I feel that I have a little bit more latitude in supervising the unpaid interns, because often with pay or with securing the funds to pay them, I have had to argue that they will do very specific actions to get that funding, and that can sometimes limit the changes in routes that we can go and the variety of artifacts that I can give people. For example, at the moment we have an intern in the lab who is being paid, but part of her role is really tied to monitoring iron solutions and helping with air abrasion. And so we're, because there are very specific constraints there, we're limited in how many other projects we can give her along the way. And I think that I hope that the pre-program interns ultimately take away an appreciation of conservation, and whether they go on to any other path or not.
Great, thank you. Leanne?
Hi, this is Leanne. I recently completed a 2-year fellowship in objects conservation at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and I'm a graduate of the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation. I had 5 pre-program internships over the course of about 4 years, which were all unpaid. My internships included working with a conservator in private practice at a regional conservation center, a science museum, a fine art museum, and at an archaeological excavation. So during the same time as my internships, I was also taking courses part-time to meet the grad school requirements, and I was also working part to full-time. And personally, since the additional coursework was the limiting factor influencing my timing in applying for grad school, I didn't need to rush my internship experiences, so I was happy to pick up hours here and there along the way. Several of my internships were fairly informal. I was able to drop in when I could, when it fit with my schedule, or when there were intern suitable projects available. Others of my internships were set as a very formalized number of hours or days per week. And in the case of the excavation I worked on, it was actually multiple weeks full-time. So for me, the keys to having good internship experiences were my ability to be flexible about scheduling and to be open-minded about trying new things. For example, at the regional center where I worked, the objects lab wasn't accepting interns, but the textiles lab was. So I worked with a textile conservator and got to do some pretty cool things. And I feel that the best experiences that I gained from my pre-program internships were a very broad exposure to conservation activities, from environmental monitoring to treatment to outreach, working in the galleries, things like that. I also think that the opportunity to work with a range of materials beyond one specialization was also something that was really great about my pre-program experience. And some of my fondest memories are of dry cleaning watercolor sketches on paper artworks at the Cincinnati Art Museum. I was asked to mention something that I wish I had known as a pre-program intern. And looking back, one of the things that I remember is that I had unrealistic ideas about what grad school was going to be like. I thought that the hardest thing about being a conservator was getting into grad school, but actually grad school and what comes after are really difficult too. It's a tremendous amount of work, and I'm not saying that this would have changed my mind in any way, but I would have had more realistic expectations. And I think that one of the most important things that these internships do is help people understand whether a career in conservation is what they would enjoy doing. Ayesha? No.
Yes.
Thank you. Ayesha?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ayesha Fuentes, and I'm a current third-year student with the UCLA Getty program in the Conservation of Archaeological and Ethnographic Materials. And at present, I'm on the first of my third-year internships in Thimphu, Bhutan, where I'm working with the Department of Culture with the local Bhutanese conservators on wall paintings and also some tonka and other ritual objects. And my pre-program experience was it was varied. There was a pretty broad range. From 2008 to 2011, I worked with private practice paintings conservators, and my background was in paintings, actually, and carpentry, and I originally thought that I wanted to go into paintings. So I started working with private practice paintings conservators and in Seattle, and then later outside of Boston, and those were paid positions, actually. And then just before I got into school, I worked for a year with the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in the Objects Lab in an unpaid position. So I had a bit of a range in terms of paid positions in private practice versus a fine arts museum unpaid position as well. But my background, as I said, was in carpentry and fine art, and also one of the most valuable experiences I had was working as a large-scale display fabricator, which is really just the person who makes signs for museums, which got me interested in structural solutions and structural problems, mount making, but also creating, shipping things effectively, packing them, hand skills. I also learned a lot about solvents, so definitely not something that would normally count as kind of a pre-program internship. It was my full-time job, but I learned a lot from that as well. And I think that, for me, really kind of sums up what I think the best part about the pre-program experience was that I had a lot of different work experiences. I had conservation-focused work experiences, but then I had other work experiences, and a lot of that equals, to me, people skills. You learn how to work with different types of people. You learn what it means for you to be able to kind of get through that day and sit through a meeting, and something about teamwork, which ends up being a lot more important in conservation than many people would like to think. A lot of us like to concentrate on kind of the hand skills and the technical knowledge, but people skills are really key. And also just, like LeeAnn was saying, self-knowledge, knowing what kinds of issues and problems I was attracted to, and knowing that in the end I didn't want to do paintings conservation, and kind of changing and having the opportunity to get those different types of experiences and eventually end up at the UCLA Getty program, which is exactly where I wanted to be, and ended up being a really good decision, but I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't worked through it. And then, as LeeAnn was saying, something that I wish I had known as a pre-program intern, it's something that I thought also when I originally got to grad school that I just kept repeating to myself, is that it's not what you know, but what you can learn. And that's a really important thing to show, you know, admissions committees, but also your supervisors, everybody around you. And, you know, it's what you can learn, and it's why you want to learn it, and you should enjoy it, you know. And I think that was the really important thing for me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all that great information. I'd like to start now with our first group discussion question. So, you know, this has been alluded to a little bit, but what do you consider to be the most significant experiences and skills for a pre-program intern to gain?
Well, I think in a way this ties in with Ayesha's closing comments, and that's identifying what it is that they really want to do. And I know that that's one of the main things about the MAT project that we use, is it helps people determine whether or not they actually have like basic hand skills where they can do fine measuring, accurate cutting, but the main thing is they should be willing to identify whether or not it's something that they want to be doing, and becoming comfortable with their skills.
I think
This is LeeAnn. Oh, go ahead, Molly.
No, go ahead, LeeAnn.
I was just going to second what Tom was saying, that, again, I feel like a significant experience that one might have as a pre-program intern, I think, is that moment, the aha moment that makes you say, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. I feel like that's hopefully something that people will experience as a pre-program, that helps you reaffirm that this is the right path.
Or,
so that could be anything. That could be an anything aha moment, like rolling a cotton swab for the first time, or walking through museum galleries at 8 a.m. before they're open to download environmental data. Or, like Tom said, maybe it's an aha moment saying, actually, this is not for me.
Exactly.
And I think there's a sense of confidence that pre-program internships help to build with people. You're sort of shifting a dream or an aspiration into something more concrete, and you're learning the language along the way, and you're learning just, you know, how objects feel, which can be really different from the idea that, oh, I've heard about this and it's what I think I want to do. I remember that with the pre-program internships that I did many moons ago, that was what I felt I was getting out of it, was that I had heard a talk by a conservator and thought, that is the coolest job. But it was getting the physical sense of what they did that I found really built my sense of confidence that it was the path that I did want to pursue.
I think that's a really, this is Ayesha, I think that's a really good point about kind of the physical confidence and kind of even the physical language of working in pre-program work. I mean, a lot, you know, you get to school and there is an assumption that you know you have a certain amount of body awareness around objects, and learning that. For some people it takes longer, for some people it's automatic. Well, I don't know about automatic, but it takes a little less time. But I think that's a really important thing, and just kind of letting that set, that's not an instant process. Like, it's something that really takes used to, and ends up becoming a really important part of your job is how you handle objects. So I think those really essential skills like handling, those accumulate, and I think that's a really important part of the pre-program experience. Yeah. Oh, and that was the other thing I was going to say, is that with the swab rolling, it seems like there's also, like, you want to decide that it's for you. There are going to be bad days, obviously, in pre-program experiences, and there are going to be days when you're just like, never mind, I don't really need to do that. But if you wake up the next day and you still want to go back to work, or it's still compelling to you for some reason, that's a really good moment to have to kind of get through that dark period and then come back to it.
I think that's a great point, Ayesha. I know many years ago a mentor of mine asked me what makes a conservator, and I was, you know, giving off all kinds of highfalutin sounding comments and definitions, and finally he goes, "Yeah, that's great, Tom, that's great, but no, the real answer is, when you walk in the lab one day and you're working on the treatment and you make a mistake and you really damage something, and you come back into work the next day and you start addressing the problem, that's what makes a conservator." And that's one of the things that we always try to get people to understand, that when you're working on works of art, particularly works of art on paper where your margin of error is non-existent, things can happen, and you have to not allow that to devastate you, and you just have to, and what we try to get our students to understand is, when something goes wrong, look at yourself first. What role did you play in it? And learn from that so that you don't do it again. And being in private practice also, one of the things that I know that some of our students have worried that they're taking too long to get something done. And we try to make sure that they understand that they're here to learn. They're not here to be fast. They're here to learn. And speed comes later. The important thing is for them to learn what we're teaching them, and then turn it into their own and develop speed after they've learned the skill or the technique.
Okay, if there are no other thoughts, we can move on to our second question. If a pre-program intern is in a situation in which they feel they're not gaining the experience they'd like, how do you recommend they proceed with addressing the situation?
That doesn't happen here, because we make it clear from the beginning that, well, one, we have a discussion as to what they are anticipating, and we identify whether or not we can accomplish that for them. But we also make sure that they understand that if they feel that they are not getting what they want, that they need to come and tell us that, so that we can correct the situation. And when we have interns, I'm usually periodically will say, is this going where you want it to go, where you think you need it to go? And so I always keep that door open.
I similarly try to check in with interns and make sure that they are getting what they wanted. I know that in one case we did have a situation where somebody felt that it had moved, that the internship had moved away from their original goals, that they were finding that they were interested in other paths in conservation. We're lucky here. We have a number of different labs all working in the same building, so interns not only get to see what we do in our lab, but they get to peek into other areas and look into them. And this intern was becoming more and more interested in textiles, and we tried to redefine her object, the kinds of objects she was working on in the lab, so that she worked on a survey of some of the archaeological textiles in the collection, and so we tried to alter things a little bit along the way.
I think oh.
No,
Leanne,
go ahead, Ayesha. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that from the other side of that, as an intern, you know, it's a really tough thing to learn kind of how to advocate for yourself, especially in a professional situation when you just really, really want that position. But it's an important thing to do from the get-go, just to say, if you can, you know, if you aren't as lucky to have supervisors like Tom and Emily who will communicate you from the get-go, sometimes you kind of have to step up for yourself and say, like, you know, what should I expect from you? What kinds of projects are we going to be working on? What's your forecast? You know, and sometimes they'll just say, well, let's give it 2 weeks and see how it works out. But then at least you have an opportunity, you have a checkpoint, and establishing that, I think, can help a lot in terms of being able to advocate for yourself as an intern. The other thing that I think actually Emily just brought up, which was a really good point, is that if you're really uncertain with how things are going, and maybe you don't know if this is what a pre-program internship is like, go visit another lab. Like, go see if you can reach out to anyone else who's working a pre-program internship and see what their experiences are, or just tour other labs, ask other questions, and just get more involved, because maybe it's just a lack of familiarity with what a pre-program internship is, either on your part or on your supervisor's part, so that maybe a little bit of research actually could help.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ayesha just said. I think that some people aren't always as lucky to have the same kind of mentors as Emily or Tom, who are checking in with them. So I think that it's so important to advocate for yourself, but I think part of that is knowing what your goals are. So I think it's important to do things like Ayesha said, try and find out what other people are doing as well in other labs, in other cities, and that's part of why ECPN is so great, because there is this huge network now of people that can offer suggestions. But if you have an idea of what goals you might have for yourself, it's a good idea to try and articulate that to your supervisor. Maybe to try set up something like progress meetings every couple weeks, or however, at some sort of frequency, even if it doesn't take very long, but just so that somehow you can check in with your supervisor, or they see these are the goals you've set for yourself, and you can kind of gauge whether you're making progress towards those experiences you want. But I also think it's okay if you don't feel satisfied where you are and you legitimately try to change things. I think it's okay to think about looking for something else too.
I would agree with that completely. I think that it's important, and we've had a couple of situations here where it became obvious that what was happening here wasn't really where the intern needed to be, and we tried to help place them, or we just encouraged them. Not everybody's a conservator, and that's one of the things that the pre-program experience should help define. That it's okay to love conservation. That doesn't mean you're cut out to be a conservator, and don't be afraid to recognize that, and don't be afraid to admit it, and then decide, okay, so where can this go from here? What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
I think there also is a point in setting realistic goals along the way. We've had interns who have sort of expected to or wanted to run before they can walk, and occasionally one has to, you know, say, well, let's slow this down, let's step back to this point. And I think that towards the end of their time in the lab, they've realized some of the wisdom in that and gotten much more, realized that there was more to learn of processes. For example, with air braiding, that, you know, just being able to turn the machine on to get the first object through is an amazing achievement. But really feeling comfortable with very fragmentary iron surfaces, which sometimes are well adhered and sometimes are horribly adhered, can take a lot more time and skill development. And towards the end of the time, they could see what they had learned, but there was a small amount of frustration early on because they felt like, well, I've done that, and now I need to move on to the next thing. I should be writing a paper. I should be doing something that will advance me in a direction that I see others going or that I want to go in. And so I think that dialogue helps to sometimes point out the advantages in the process, which may not be as readily apparent along the way, but it also helps people to set realistic benchmarks, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too that it's important when introducing even just very fundamental treatment procedures, like in paper conservation, dry surface cleaning. You have to explain what that means, and you have to, we try to make sure that when we're working with an intern, whatever level they are, that they understand why they're doing something, not just how to do it, but why they're doing it and why they're doing it the way we're showing them. Because, like I started to say with dry surface cleaning paper, how you're going to go about that depends entirely on the piece of paper, whether it's an oriental paper or a soft fibered paper, what's the medium that's on it. There are certain treatment, any given treatment procedure is going to be governed by what it is you're using it on, and getting people to understand the nuances and learning how to think about what they're doing and not to just do something, but think about it.
And I just want to kind of wrap this up with just a thought that the question is generally that if we're not getting the experience that we'd like, how could we proceed with addressing the situation? Sometimes the experiences that you don't like, and I don't want to take this to an extreme where you're really torturing yourself, but sometimes the things that you don't like really end up being the most valuable. And I'm sure, you know, everyone who's an adult knows that ours is a durational profession. It has to deal with patience and constant learning, and sometimes those can be really tough activities or exercises, but be patient with yourselves and be patient with your situation, because it's probably that more than anything is what's needed.
That's a really good point, Ayesha.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for that great discussion. That really segues well into our question and answer period moderated by Eliza.
Hi everyone. As Ayesha said, I will be moderating the Q&A discussion, which will feature questions that we received prior to the program. And I noticed that no one has typed in any questions into our question box on the control panel.
Oh.
So if you have any
Eliza?
please...
Eliza?
Oh.
Eliza?
Hi, Eric.
Excuse me, this is Eric. For some reason, I seem to be the only one who can see the questions, and there are at least 4 of them here, so if you want me to read those out loud, I'd be happy to at your prompt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Well, we received a number of questions prior to the program, so maybe we'll start with those and see how many of the questions we can get to from during the program. And any unanswered questions, we will be sure to follow up either on the AIC blog or in a follow-up webinar. So our first question is sort of a 2-part question. Are conservators willing to take on a pre-program intern with no prior experience in conservation? If so, what kind of knowledge or skills can a student demonstrate to secure an internship? So perhaps the first part of the question might be kind of more intended for Emily and Tom, and the second part for Ayesha and LeeAnn, but please feel free to jump in on either part.
I think it depends on the conservator and the things that they have going on in their lab. I know I have a colleague here who has an extraordinarily busy exhibit schedule, and for her, you know, a pre-program intern who has not had experience in her media would just be the straw that broke the camel's back at the moment. And so she considers her lab kind of closed. In my lab, that's not an issue. So it depends on the conservator. Adding to the last part, if I can, I think that one of the key things that a student can demonstrate, and this is going to make me sound like an old Victorian woman, I'm sure, but is letter writing skills. I get a lot of emails that say, hey, tell me about interning in your lab, or tell me about the labs at CW. And those are often emails that I may not answer. But, you know, when somebody writes me an email, uses my name, tells me a little bit about themselves and their interests, I'm much more willing to start a dialogue with them about internships, what we might have to offer, et cetera. And so that's a skill that just out of the, you know, straight out of the gate, people can demonstrate that might help with internships.
Well, I think that's a good point, Emily. Most of our pre-program people have come to us as a result of a deliberate inquiry, either via one of their professors at the Art Institute here in Kansas City, or some kind of direct formal communication. I think that the lack of formality can be off-putting from the beginning. That doesn't mean you have to be stilted, but you know, don't approach somebody you want to do an internship and act like you've known them for 20 years, because you haven't. And we try to run things professionally, casually here, but professional is a key element. Most of the interns that we've had have not had any prior conservation experience, and that is not a game ender for us. That's where we begin at that. But if you want to show some kind of skill, have some kind of a portfolio, and you know, that shows some artwork that you've done, some craftsmanship that you've done. Have some kind of a portfolio that you can show that says, you know, this is where I am, but I want to go somewhere else with it. That to me is important. Be thinking about that, and you're taking your pre-program internship to learn about conservation. And so we don't expect people to know much more than the field exists frequently. And the fact that they are interested in pursuing that is often, you know, a big thing to bring, is just a level of awareness and interest. And then your internship is going to put you on that path.
Thanks, Tom and Emily, for those great thoughts. LeeAnn and Ayesha, did you have anything to add to that?
I think those guys had excellent points. I've seen it be very situational about whether a conservator accepts someone with experience or none. So I think you can definitely, we all got to start somewhere, right? But as far as tangible things that a student can demonstrate, Tom mentioned crafts and art, studio art. So whether that's portfolio or photographs or some way to demonstrate that you have some form of hand skills. I feel like I may have needed to supply my school transcript at one point for one of the internships that I did. I think that was part of it. So that's, I don't know, one thing to think about. Ayesha?
Yeah, I definitely didn't have to turn in any school transcripts. I think my experiences were a lot more situational, where a lot of times it just happened to be, certainly the first time, the first person who really took me on, I did have a background in painting and carpentry and had some hand skills, but I just happened to call him at the right moment, and he had the right project there, and he said, would you like to come work for me? And I think I don't even think I was looking for an internship at the time. And I know there are many people who are hissing at me right now because I really didn't. I accidentally wandered into a pre-program internship, but it really is situational. And I have since then, especially with summer internships and my third-year internships, and even in pre-program situations, I sent out so many letters and made so many phone calls that just weren't returned. Don't get discouraged. Yeah. A lot of times, it's like Emily was just saying, it's like, you know, sometimes you just can't respond. And maybe that's a question of you working on your self-presentation, which is a really key point. It's really important. But also maybe it's just that they just can't respond. So just keep going. If this is something you really want to do, stick with it, and eventually someone will get back to you, I promise.
Thanks, LeeAnn and Ayesha. And that actually sort of addresses another question we received, which is if you've applied for a pre-program position and have tried following up by email and phone, and say you are someone who's written a really excellent letter and you haven't received a response, how do you recommend proceeding? So Ayesha, you said, you know, you kind of intimated that one should just kind of keep going. Do others have any thoughts about that?
No, I think that is the answer. I know it's happened a couple of times here because, you know, I get a message left on my desk that says so-and-so called, and that sometimes is a dangerous thing to do, is leave a message for me on my desk. But most of the time when something goes unresponded, it's probably just due to the fact that the conservator is really busy, and you just have to persevere. And I know that there have been a couple of times here where I sometimes took 3 weeks to get back to somebody, but once we made the connection, it was definitely worth it, and it worked out. And it's at least from my perspective, it's not due to deliberate ignoring. It's just due to a very full schedule. And if that's, and sometimes you just have to, you know, leave a message saying, I'm trying to get in touch with you. Will you please respond? And that should get you a response.
This is LeeAnn. Something Tom said reminded me of something that's happened to me when I was at the MFA. Sometimes people will call asking to come for a visit to the lab or other things like that, and they'll leave a voicemail, and they won't repeat themselves. The way that the voicemail is, they mumble their name, they mumble the phone number to reach them at, or an email, and it's virtually impossible to even understand to reply to that person, because the way that they've reached out to communicate is so garbled, if you will. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but I think if you're trying to make a connection, you need to do everything to really articulate so people can contact you back. It seems kind of like common sense, but I've had that happen multiple times, even in the last year or two. So I know it happens. I think it's really important if you want that to connect. I think probably email is one of the better ways to get someone's attention. And if you are leaving a voicemail, it's always a good thing to try to repeat your name multiple times and the phone number you're trying to leave for someone. I know
that's a good point, LeeAnn.
Sounds simple, but it's true.
And enunciate.
Yeah.
Enunciate the telephone number. Don't run through it real quickly, because I've had many people leave their phone number and they just say it so quickly, I can't figure it out. And that tends to irritate me and prompts me not to even try to respond.
I think, too, the point about an email is a great point, and I would just add that occasionally one gets an email that has 20 questions in it, which is wonderful that somebody is that enthusiastic that they've sat down and they've thought about what they want to ask, but it can be very daunting to then sit and compose that response, especially when other things may be going on around. And so sometimes being able to say, you know, is there a time that I could phone you to ask you these questions, that could I come and visit the lab, whatever, those sometimes are easier to respond to where it's a discrete request.
Usually if somebody leaves some kind of a message or sends me an email with a list of questions, I usually just go ahead and invite them. I don't try to respond directly to their questions. I usually just say, let's set a time when you can come and visit, and I can answer those questions in person during your visit.
And I think that's an important point about making an introduction in the first place, is that you can, you know, just write an email and say, I'm interested in a pre-program internship, and here's a little bit about me, etc. But, you know, a lot of times it's helpful just to say, like, I'm interested in conservation, may I come to visit you? Because that's also a lot easier thing to say yes to, I think, from kind of a hosting institution point of view. They're like, yeah, you can come and visit and we'll look around, and they aren't necessarily committed to that, but if they have a face to the name, or if you tell them that you are interested in the internship or an internship or any experience, I think that really helps. I think it's good to go and see as many people as you can, because sometimes if it's not them, they know someone else. So kind of making yourself visible, and also just saying hello to people face to face and presenting yourself as a human being when you can, to to the best of your ability. Obviously, it costs money to move and travel and things, but I think there's nothing wrong with just sending an email that says, "Can I come visit you?"
Yeah, I wanted to also make a comment that to the original question about if you've applied for a program and haven't received a follow-up, or are having trouble getting a response. I think one thing you might do in your follow-up messages is to ask if they can refer you anywhere else to another institution or conservator in the area. Or another thing you could do is ask for recommendations about things that you might be able to improve on to make yourself a stronger candidate in the future. So I'm kind of saying, you might be at that stage of moving on, but you might want to see if there's some helpful information they might be able, some feedback they might be able to give to you beyond the feedback that you probably already know that you may not have gotten the position.
Well, thank you all for all of those really great thoughts and helpful suggestions. We have a number of other great questions. Anisha, do you think we have time for one other question?
Yeah, we have a few minutes, so maybe we can quickly go through one more question.
Okay. Another question we received is, what jobs outside of conservation are useful in gaining pre-program experience? So I guess when I think about this question, Tom and Emily, you know, as you're reviewing resumes, are there certain jobs outside of conservation that kind of stick out to you as being, you know, that have transferable skills? And likewise, Ayesha and Leanne, are there jobs outside of conservation that you've had that you feel like have helped you transfer to conservation?
Well, for us, you know, we've had people who've had experience working in a frame shop or worked, you know, as a, you know, under lower level preparator in a museum or worked in a gallery, an art gallery as a handler, anything like that.
I think conservation is such a diverse field that one can argue that almost any job can feed into it. I mean, you know, as conservators are more involved with talking to the public, any kind of public speaking or service kind of jobs can feed into it. I think that one of the things that I look for is how the candidate convinces me that their experience relates to what they want to do and why. So I'm looking for the sentence about this is what I'm interested in, and here's the background I bring to it, and that I hope informs it in this way, because I really think you can make a case. And that's one of my favorite questions to ask established conservators is, how did you become a conservator? What path did you take? Because there's such a divergence of paths, and they're so fascinating, and people came from such different directions that it's always a fun answer to get.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for those thoughts. I noticed it's just 1 o'clock. So Leanne and Ayesha, I'm sorry you weren't able to participate in that question, but we will be following up on all of these questions, so that will give you an opportunity to weigh on them at that point. But Ayesha, I want to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Liza, and thank you so much to Tom, Emily, Leanne, and Ayesha for this informative discussion and for sharing your thoughts on such an important topic for emerging conservators. Thank you, Eliza, for moderating the Q&A discussion. And finally, thank you so much to AIC and ECPN for all of your hard work producing this program, and to you for tuning in. Today's program was recorded and will be made available on AIC's YouTube account. We hope this program is useful to you all, and please contact any ECPN officer with ideas for future programs. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great
Thanks,
to be
everyone.
here.